Sometimes, before everything changes, nothing seems to be moving at all. There is stillness, not the kind of stillness that makes you feel idle, but the kind that feels sacred. Something inside you pauses, not because you're confused, but because your soul is listening. When a woman is on the threshold of transformation, the world around her might look unchanged, but her inner world becomes unmistakably different. A soft alertness awakens inside her. The people she once chased no longer interest her. The situations she once tolerated now irritate her spirit. It's not bitterness, it's alignment. This shift is not dramatic like lightning. It is quiet like dawn, and yet it is irreversible. You begin to notice that you can't go back to who you were, even if you tried. The old self feels like a dress that no longer fits your body or your soul. This is not a breakdown. It is a breakthrough, a divine recalibration, a sign that God is preparing you for a life that's been waiting for your readiness. When this shift begins, the body whispers, the emotions speak, and everything that once made noise in your life suddenly feels distant. Not because it's gone, but because you're rising. Sometimes in life, there are no loud announcements, no flashing signs, no dramatic warnings. Instead, there is silence, a kind of stillness that is not empty, but full of insight, full of preparation, and full of sacred signals that something is about to change. This kind of silence does not come to distract you. It arrives to recalibrate you. When a woman is on the edge of a divine shift, the first thing she often notices is not chaos, but quiet, the kind of quiet that pulls her inward, that invites her to listen deeper and to observe without reacting and to sense what her eyes can't yet see. The noise of the external world starts to feel heavier, almost intrusive, and so she naturally withdraws, not out of fear, but from an intuitive knowing that the answers she seeks won't be found outside of her. This inner silence is not the same as being passive. It is active awareness. It is what ancient teachings referred to as the fertile void, a space in which transformation brews not through force, but through presence. Neuroscience today echoes this concept through studies on the brain's default mode network. When a person enters a state of quiet reflection, absent from external stimuli, this network becomes activated, promoting introspection, insight, and creativity. The brain, in essence, begins to reorganize itself. You may have experienced this without knowing, a moment when your usual distractions, your phone, your habits, even certain relationships, suddenly lose their grip on your attention. You no longer have the energy to chase them. You sit in a room, and instead of turning on the television or reaching out for company, you find yourself just being. Eyes open, thoughts swirling, but the impulse to react fades. That is not weakness. That is your nervous system resetting. That is your emotional intelligence rising. This silence reveals what noise conceals. You start to notice the small things again. The sound of your breath, the weight of your emotions, the texture of your inner dialogue. You realize how much you've been carrying. And for the first time in perhaps years, you don't rush to escape it. You feel the grief. You acknowledge the resentment. You admit the longing. And somehow, instead of drowning, you float. One woman shared her experience after years of being in a relationship where she was always trying to prove her worth. She said, "I didn't even know what peace sounded like until he stopped calling. The first few days were painful. But then the silence became my healing. I began to hear myself again." Her story isn't rare. Many women only begin to recognize their own voice after the distractions disappear. Sometimes the greatest revelations are born in solitude. This phase, when inner silence becomes loud, is often misunderstood. Outsiders may assume you're distant, cold, or depressed, but in truth, you're becoming deeply intimate with your own soul. You are re-establishing a connection that got lost beneath years of pleasing others, performing for approval, or surviving emotional storms. This stage is sacred. It is here that you begin to stop apologizing for your need for space, for depth, for meaning. In relationships, this shift shows up as a refusal to engage in shallow patterns. You stop over-explaining. You stop seeking closure from people who were never open to honest communication. You stop lowering your voice so others can feel taller. This isn't rebellion. This is evolution. You are learning that love should not require the loss of your inner peace. The inner silence prepares you for clarity, and clarity prepares you for choices, not impulsive ones, but intentional ones. You begin to ask different questions. Is this aligned with who I am becoming? Does this bring me closer to peace or further from it? These are not just mental inquiries, they are embodied decisions. The body keeps score, as the trauma expert Bessel van der Kolk says, and your body begins to tell you, through tension, fatigue, or intuition, what relationships are draining and what environments are dishonoring your growth. As you sit longer in the quiet, you begin to separate your truth from your trauma. You begin to realize which parts of your personality were shaped by survival and which were born from authenticity. The silence becomes a mirror, not the kind that reflects your appearance, but the kind that reflects your soul. And in this mirror, you finally see the version of you that has been waiting to be noticed. Not the performer, not the people pleaser, not the anxious fixer, but the steady, clear, awake woman who is no longer afraid of her own presence. This silence is not the end of something. It is the womb of something. And while the world around you may question your withdrawal, the universe within you celebrates your return. From this quiet awakening, something else begins to emerge, the loosening of attachment to old patterns. This is where the second sign reveals itself. As you become more attuned to your inner world, your tolerance for emotional chaos begins to shrink. What once seemed acceptable now feels suffocating. It's not that you suddenly dislike people or places. It's that your energy no longer matches what you once tolerated. There is a moment when a woman looks at her life and thinks, I can't keep doing this. Not in a dramatic way, but in a sincere, deep, embodied knowing. The way she shows up in relationships shifts. She stops begging for reciprocity. She stops romanticizing inconsistency. She sees patterns she never saw before, not just in others, but in herself. This isn't rejection, it's release. Detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. And clarity does not require confrontation, it only requires truth. The truth that some of the ways you've been coping, some of the people you've been holding on to, and some of the cycles you've repeated are not aligned with where your spirit is being called to go. This stage is often accompanied by confusion. You may ask yourself, why do I feel so different? The truth is, the nervous system is recalibrating. Neuroplasticity is taking place. Your brain, after repeated experiences of pain or disappointment, begins to rewire itself when you decide, even quietly, this is not what I want anymore. Cognitive behavioral psychology calls this cognitive restructuring. You begin to challenge old beliefs, such as, I have to be needed to be loved, or if I set a boundary, I'll be abandoned. And slowly, a new internal script forms. I can be loved for who I am without overextending. Or, if someone leaves because I honor my needs, they were never meant to stay. One woman shared that after 15 years of constantly fixing broken relationships, she sat on her porch one morning and just whispered, I'm done. Not in bitterness, not in anger, but in peace. That same week, she deleted old conversations, stopped checking who viewed her stories, and blocked the man who only reached out when he needed comfort, but never gave it. For the first time, she felt light. That lightness wasn't because someone else changed. It was because she did. This emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start caring wisely. You recognize that your attention is a form of currency. And just like your money, your energy must be invested, not spent. You start recognizing emotional overdrafts. You see where you've been giving love like it's a loan, hoping someone would pay it back with commitment or validation. But now you don't wait for repayment. You choose to write it off and walk away. This is emotional maturity. It's when your peace becomes more important than proving your point. When you'd rather lose a relationship than lose your self-respect. And slowly, your standards rise, not out of ego, but out of evolution. You no longer entertain what makes your soul shrink. There is a psychological term called extinction burst. It describes how, when a habit begins to die, it fights back. So don't be surprised if, in this stage, the people you've distanced from suddenly reach out. The old cravings may spike. The urge to go back might whisper. But if you stay grounded, if you breathe through the discomfort, the pattern will pass. And on the other side of that wave is freedom. One of the most beautiful outcomes of this detachment is the ability to observe without reacting. You start seeing people as they are, not as you hoped they would be. You learn to love from a distance, to pray for people without letting them break you, to forgive without re-inviting chaos. This detachment also sharpens your inner compass. You become less influenced by external pressure and more aligned with internal purpose. The compliments don't sway you. The criticism doesn't shake you. You start moving from within. And that is when everything begins to shift. Not because the world has changed, but because your alignment has. You have returned to yourself. And from that place, all decisions, all connections, and all dreams begin to take root in sacred soil. There comes a point in a woman's life when she no longer wonders why certain people have disappeared from her journey. She stops chasing explanations. She stops trying to glue broken connections back together. And instead, she begins to recognize a powerful and mysterious truth. Relationships reflect the state of our inner world. They are mirrors. They do not lie. As her awareness deepens, as she grows emotionally, spiritually, and energetically, her relationships start shifting too. Not because she has become arrogant or distant, but because her frequency has changed. What used to attract her no longer holds power. What once seemed like love, she now sees as emotional addiction. What felt like passion, she now recognizes as unresolved trauma playing dress up. The beauty of this moment is that it doesn't come with dramatic arguments or loud exits. It happens in whispers, in quiet choices, in gentle detachment. It is the shedding of who she no longer is. This process is rooted in resonance. Just as two musical instruments tuned to the same frequency will vibrate together, human beings are drawn toward others who match their internal energy. This is not mystical theory. It's supported by neuroscience. The principle of emotional contagion explains how emotions, attitudes, and even levels of awareness can be transferred through social contact. Our brains are wired with mirror neurons, which respond to the emotions of those around us, often without conscious awareness. That's why being around anxious people can make us anxious. It's why peace feels contagious. And it's why, when a woman evolves internally, she naturally becomes uncomfortable in emotionally unhealthy environments. One woman shared her story after going through deep inner work. She had spent years trying to hold on to friendships that drained her, to romantic connections that only thrived when she was silent and self-sacrificing. But after she began healing, meditating, and building boundaries, Something strange started to happen. Her phone stopped ringing. People who once sought her out daily became distant. She felt rejected at first, but over time, she saw the truth. They didn't abandon her. Her evolution simply outgrew the frequency they were operating on. She said, "They weren't bad people, but I had changed, and they didn't know how to relate to this version of me that no longer needed validation." This reflection is not meant to create judgment toward others. It's about understanding energetic mismatch. Relationships require energetic compatibility, not perfection, but alignment. If someone thrives on chaos and you've moved towards stillness, there will be friction. If someone feeds on attention and you've moved into quiet sovereignty, there will be distance. It's not a failure. It's an indication that you're stepping into a new layer of truth. The change in resonance also brings something else: clarity. You begin to sense people's intentions without needing them to explain. You feel the undercurrent of their energy. You walk into a room and intuitively know who is at peace and who is masking pain. This sensitivity is not emotional fragility. It is strength. It's the sharpened edge of inner work. You can no longer ignore what your spirit feels. You can't pretend a smile is sincere when your intuition knows it's hollow. You can't maintain small talk when your soul craves authenticity. In romantic relationships, this new clarity can be jarring. The partner who once felt like home may now feel like confinement. The emotional games that once thrilled you now exhaust you. You crave depth, presence, truth. You no longer find safety in potential. You seek reality, and that may mean walking away from people you still love. Not because they are unworthy, but because love without alignment is not peace. It's pain in disguise. When you shift internally, you stop trying to be chosen. You start choosing. You no longer shrink yourself to fit into someone else's world. You become the architect of your own. And from that grounded place, you draw people who see you, not just your beauty, but your soul. You attract relationships rooted in growth, not survival. You form bonds that challenge you, nourish you, and mirror back the respect you've learned to give yourself. This is not an easy transition. There will be moments of loneliness. There will be nights when you miss the old connections, even the unhealthy ones. But every time you sit in that stillness and resist going backward, your nervous system learns safety. Your heart builds new patterns. You become emotionally resilient. That resilience carries you into the next phase of transformation, one that often arrives without warning. A deep fatigue begins to set in, not just physical tiredness, but soul tiredness, the kind of weariness that makes even the simplest tasks feel heavy. You may wonder, why do I feel so drained when I've been doing everything right? This fatigue is not failure, it is preparation. In the journey of transformation, the body often slows before the spirit rises. This exhaustion is not just emotional, it's neurological. As the brain adapts to new habits, boundaries, and perceptions, it uses more energy. Neural rewiring is labor-intensive. Studies show that when we form new behavioral patterns, especially those that challenge deeply ingrained emotional responses, our prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for conscious decision-making, becomes hyperactive. This mental overwork leads to what many call decision fatigue. And yet, in spiritual transitions, this fatigue serves a sacred purpose. You are being stripped of everything you can no longer carry into your next season. Old identities, false roles, emotional dependencies, outdated beliefs. They are falling away. And just like a body recovering from surgery, your system needs rest. Not because you are lazy, but because you are healing. During this period, many women feel confused. Their lives may look stable from the outside, jobs, relationships, routines. But inside, everything feels uncertain. The old goals no longer motivate. The usual distractions feel dull, even ambition pauses. But this pause is not permanent. It is the space where recalibration happens. There is a short story of a woman named Elena who, after years of emotional turmoil, finally found peace in her solitude. For the first time, she was sleeping well, eating healthy, and setting boundaries. But strangely, she felt exhausted all the time. She described it as a bone, deep tiredness. Her therapist explained, "You are not tired from doing nothing. You are tired from carrying the weight of transformation." That moment shifted her perspective. She stopped resisting the fatigue and began honoring it as part of her awakening. This kind of fatigue often precedes a sudden, almost electric clarity. One morning, you wake up and feel different. Not euphoric, but calm. You open your eyes and know what you need to do. The relationship you need to leave, the habit you need to break, the space you need to claim. It comes not as a loud voice, but as a gentle knowing. Your body feels lighter. Your heart feels aligned. You move with intention, not urgency. This wave of clarity does not erase the fatigue. It transforms it. You start viewing rest as a tool, not a weakness. You stop explaining your need for space. You no longer push yourself to match others' pace. You walk in rhythm with your soul. In relationships, this manifests as emotional precision. You know who brings you peace and who brings you pressure. You recognize who fuels your spirit and who confuses your clarity. And without malice, without drama, you begin to step away from the latter, not because you're better, but because you're becoming whole. This kind of emotional refinement is rare in a world that romanticizes speed and productivity. But in this stage, you choose presence over performance. You realize that doing less can bring you more peace, more clarity, more real love. One of the greatest gifts of this phase is that you stop forcing outcomes. You stop trying to control every detail. You allow things to unfold. You trust divine timing. And as your body recovers, as your soul aligns, you start seeing the beauty in uncertainty. You begin to understand that rest is not the opposite of progress. It is its foundation. This newfound clarity leads to decisions that once felt impossible, leaving that relationship that drains you, saying no without guilt, investing in your peace. These are not acts of rebellion. They are acts of self-respect. And slowly, as the fatigue lifts, you rise, not in noise, but in quiet certainty. Not in ego, but in grounded awareness. You begin to live not just with intention, but with alignment. You become a woman who moves through the world not seeking validation, but radiating truth. And from this truth, all things begin to realign. Your health, your relationships, your sense of purpose. Because when the internal changes, the external must follow. And the life you once prayed for begins to meet the woman you've become. There is a stage in a woman's transformation where her desire for external noise fades into a deep craving for solitude. But unlike the isolation that comes from sadness or rejection, this solitude feels sacred. It is not loneliness. It is not absence. It is presence. Pure, clear, undistracted presence. The world begins to quiet not because it has changed, but because she has. She no longer seeks to be filled by what is outside her. She begins to listen inwardly, deeply, attentively. This is the moment when solitude becomes nourishment. In earlier seasons of life, being alone might have felt like punishment. It might have triggered fears of abandonment or stirred up unresolved emotions. But now, this time alone is not empty. It is full of reflection, full of renewal, full of spiritual grounding. She doesn't hide in this space. She reclaims herself in it. Solitude is where the mind untangles and the heart unfolds. In a world that praises constant engagement, emotional availability, and instant responses, choosing solitude is an act of radical self-awareness. There is a strength in being able to sit with your own presence and not flinch To not reach for a distraction, to not scroll, call, or text, to not perform for connection. There is power in being able to enjoy your own silence, not because others are absent, but because you are enough in your own company. A woman once described how after years of attaching her worth to how much others needed her, she finally stepped away. She moved to a smaller apartment, began going on walks alone, started journaling each morning with no one watching, no one validating. At first, she said it felt like losing oxygen, but then breathing became easier. I began to hear my own voice. She said, and I realized I had silenced it for years in the noise of being liked. This is the deep gift of chosen solitude. It reveals not only who we are, but what we've been pretending to be. Many women spend years in relationships where their identities are blurred by compromise, where their values are softened for peace, where their desires are shelved for someone else's comfort. But in solitude, everything you buried comes back to the surface, not to torment you, but to remind you of what matters. There is an old saying, if you don't go within, you go without. That saying is not about being distant, it is about being aligned. Because it is only in going within that you begin to remember your inner compass. The one that knows when you're betraying yourself. The one that speaks through tension in your chest or a quiet ache in your stomach. The body becomes a mirror in solitude. It shows you what the mind has ignored. This shift brings a natural transformation in relationships. You begin to realize how many of your past connections were based on distraction, on escaping yourself, on filling emotional space that you weren't yet ready to meet with your own presence. The constant need to talk, to text, to entertain begins to fade. You no longer need someone to validate your thoughts for them to be true. You stop explaining yourself to be understood. You stop broadcasting your growth to be acknowledged. You no longer crave an audience. You are becoming your own witness. Solitude teaches you what kind of love you truly need. Because when you are no longer overwhelmed by the need to be chosen, you begin to choose more wisely. You start asking different questions. Not, do they want me? But, does this connection support my peace? Not, will they change for me? But, is this person living in integrity with themselves? You begin to see that true partnership is not built on emotional dependency. It is built on mutual wholeness. And you are learning slowly but surely how to become whole in your own right. In psychology, there's a concept called emotional differentiation. It refers to a person's ability to maintain their sense of self in close relationships. Many women are conditioned from a young age to merge, to mirror others' emotions, to soften themselves in conflict, to anticipate everyone else's needs. But solitude builds differentiation. It teaches you how to sit with your own discomfort, how to soothe yourself, how to think your own thoughts without being absorbed by someone else's emotional weather. You no longer need to be rescued. You no longer believe that love requires you to be less. You begin to understand that the highest form of love is not found in dependency, but in presence, in two people who know how to be whole alone and yet choose to walk together. Not out of need, but from sacred alignment. One woman told her story of being in a relationship where she was always in crisis. Trying to be enough, trying to earn love, trying to stay one step ahead of rejection. She finally left, not because she changed, but because she changed. She said, "It wasn't his silence that hurt me anymore. It was mine that healed me." In the quiet that followed the breakup, she began taking herself out to dinner, going on solo trips, learning how to rest without guilt. That space taught her how to love herself, not through affirmations or mirrors, but through reverence. This kind of solitude doesn't require running away from the world. It's not about isolation. It's about integration. It's about being with yourself in such a deep and honest way that even when you re-enter relationships, you no longer abandon yourself in them. You carry the stillness with you. You enter love with awareness. You don't mistake intensity for intimacy. You don't settle for confusion. You don't hand over your peace for fleeting connection. In Eastern thought, there is a stage in the meditative journey called dhyana, which means meditative absorption. It is a phase of complete focus and inner stillness. In that state, the mind and the object of meditation merge into one. The self disappears as something deeper emerges. Clarity without effort. Solitude, when embraced fully, becomes a kind of dhyana, not a denial of the world, but a re-entry into it from a grounded and undisturbed center. From this inner center, relationships take on a new meaning. You are no longer looking to someone else to complete a narrative. You are not seeking saviors. You are not trying to relive the wounds of your parents through your partners. You come with clear eyes and an open heart, but a protected spirit. Not guarded, but conscious. Not distant, but discerning. Because you now know your value, not because someone told you, but because you spent time with yourself long enough to feel it. This kind of woman no longer fears being alone. She knows that alone does not mean unloved. It means unfiltered. It means uninterrupted. It means undistracted from the truth of who she is. And in that truth, she thrives. There is also a physiological wisdom in this solitude. When we disconnect from constant relational stress, our nervous system begins to down-regulate. The body shifts from fight or flight into rest and repair mode. Our cortisol levels drop. Our sleep improves. Our digestion restores. We stop bracing ourselves for betrayal. The body learns safety again. And from that safety, the heart opens not because it's desperate, but because it is healed. Solitude becomes a mirror and a medicine. It shows you where you've abandoned yourself to be chosen. It reveals the patterns you've called love, but were really coping mechanisms. And it invites you to rebuild from within, without pretense, without performing, without pretending. You begin to choose partners who reflect your peace, not your pain. You no longer find excitement in emotional highs and lows. You want steadiness, softness, someone who doesn't need to be chased, fixed, or translated. Someone whose presence feels like an echo of your own. This is not fantasy. It's alignment. And alignment only comes when you stop running from yourself long enough to sit with your shadows, your desires, your needs, and your fears, and meet them with compassion, not shame. Solitude offers that sacred space. It does not erase the need for love. It teaches you how to love from overflow, not emptiness. There is a quote that says, "You cannot pour from an empty cup." But the deeper truth is, your cup must first be filled by the well within. And that well is found in silence, in space, in the daily rituals of being with yourself and honoring that presence as enough. From that space, you will still desire connection. But now, it will come from discernment, not desperation. You will seek someone not to fill the gaps, but to walk beside you in reverence for your wholeness. You will not explain your boundaries. You will live them. You will not perform for attention. You will radiate presence. And that presence will become your most powerful filter. The people who can't meet you there will drift. The people who are meant for you will recognize your frequency. Not because you shouted it, but because you lived it. And you will know that this stage, this quiet, sacred, solitary becoming was not a detour. It was the path. There is a quiet shift that takes place in a woman's life when she begins to sense things before they are spoken. When the truth speaks louder in silence than in words. When presence reveals more than performance. It's not always something she can explain logically. It's a knowing, a deep, internal alertness that doesn't come from the mind, comes from the soul. This kind of awareness can't be taught in books or found in titles. It comes from walking through pain and not being destroyed by it, from being lied to and learning how to see, from breaking and learning how to rebuild with inner strength instead of outer attachment. This is the sixth sign that something sacred is happening inside her. Her sensitivity increases, not in the way the world often judges sensitivity as weakness, but in a way that makes her sharper, more discerning, more spiritually tuned. She is no longer fooled by pretty words. She no longer clings to potential. She is drawn toward what resonates, not what merely entertains, impresses, or pleases. Her body becomes a compass, her emotions a weather report, her nervous system a truth detector. This inner sensitivity isn't a burden, it's her awakening. In relationships, this is where the most profound changes begin to take place. She starts recognizing when love feels safe versus when it feels familiar, and the two are rarely the same. What feels familiar might be the emotional chaos she grew up in, the anxious pull of inconsistent affection, the thrill of being needed but never truly known. But what feels safe, it's calm, consistent, centered. And in the beginning, that safety might feel boring, because safety doesn't spike adrenaline. It doesn't create a roller coaster. It offers peace. And peace, to a woman used to fighting for love, can feel foreign. Her sensitivity begins to distinguish between the two. She no longer mislabels chaos as passion. She stops chasing after people who only offer her confusion. Her emotional radar sharpens. She senses when someone's energy doesn't match their words. She notices when someone smiles but their eyes don't. She hears the silence between sentences and feels the resistance behind every avoidance. And she trusts what she feels, even when it contradicts what she's being told. This kind of awareness doesn't come overnight. It is earned, built over time, experience, and stillness. It comes from paying attention, not just to others, but to the subtle movements within herself. The tension in her chest when she's ignoring her intuition, the tightness in her throat when she's about to agree to something that doesn't align with her truth, the sudden fatigue after spending time with someone who drains her spirit. These are not small things. These are signals. Science supports what spirituality has always known. The vagus nerve, the largest cranial nerve connecting the brain to the heart, lungs, and gut, is responsible for regulating emotions and sensitivity to others' emotional states. A woman with a well-regulated vagus nerve can feel more, not in the sense of being overwhelmed, but in being attuned. She reads energy. She picks up on emotional undercurrents. She may not be able to explain it logically, but she feels when something isn't right. And when this awareness matures, she stops arguing with what she knows. She stops ignoring red flags just to preserve temporary comfort. She stops betraying her intuition just to keep a relationship going. She realizes that anything built on her silence, her pretending, or her self-abandonment is not love, it's survival. One woman described how, after years of ignoring her instincts, she finally learned to trust the discomfort. Her partner would say all the right things, act kind in front of others, and claim he loved her. But something in her never felt safe, not physically, but emotionally. She said, "He never hit me, but every time I told him something that mattered to me, he'd dismiss it. Every time I expressed a need, he'd change the subject. And every time I cried, he called me dramatic. I started to believe I was the problem, but my body knew. My body was shutting down. I was tired all the time. I lost my voice. Literally, I would wake up hoarse. It took me years to realize my voice was disappearing because I wasn't using it." Her story is not unique. Many women become emotionally muted in relationships that don't honor their sensitivity. But once she begins to awaken to her inner awareness, She can no longer tolerate disconnection masked as love. She doesn't need to explain it to others. She doesn't need to wait for permission. She simply knows this is not what love feels like, and with that awareness comes release. She doesn't stay where she's not felt. She doesn't plead for presence. She doesn't try to convince someone to meet her in her truth, because she understands someone who loves you will not dismiss the parts of you that are inconvenient to love. Someone who is for you will not gaslight your sensitivity. They will treasure it, not because you demand it, but because they recognize the sacredness of it. Her sensitivity also makes her gentler. She becomes less reactive, more observant. She listens more than she speaks, not because she is passive, but because she is processing at a different level. She no longer needs to win arguments. She seeks understanding. She no longer rushes to fix people. She offers presence instead. This calmness is not apathy, it is discipline. She is choosing peace over drama, connection over control, truth over comfort. In this space, she starts attracting differently. She draws in people who respect silence, who don't need to fill every space with words, who know how to hold space for emotions without trying to fix or flee. She becomes magnetic not because she is loud, but because she is real. Her presence is felt before she speaks. Her energy precedes her, and those who can't meet her in that energy fall away, not by force, but by frequency. There is an ancient concept known as pratyahara, which means withdrawal of the senses in order to sharpen inner awareness. It's not about disconnection, but about choosing what you allow into your emotional field. This woman, in her awakened state, practices this daily. She doesn't absorb every comment, every opinion, every mood. She chooses what enters her space. And because of this, she remains grounded even when others are not. That emotional grounding becomes her safety net in relationships. She no longer fears emotional storms. She doesn't run from conflict, but she also doesn't entertain unnecessary drama. She knows the difference between a relationship that challenges her to grow and one that drains her dry. Her emotional sensitivity doesn't make her fragile. It makes her wise. One day she may meet someone who tries to love her in the old ways, with grand gestures but shallow depth, with apologies but no changed behavior, with promises but no presence. And instead of being swept up in it, she feels the hollowness behind it. And she doesn't need to fight. She doesn't need to explain. She simply exits, not in anger, but in peace. Because she trusts herself now. She trusts what she senses. And that trust is enough. She becomes a woman who knows how to read silence, how to feel sincerity, how to sense truth. This level of sensitivity extends beyond romance. It deepens every connection. She becomes more intuitive with her children, more compassionate with her friends, more graceful with strangers. She doesn't carry other people's burdens, but she holds space for them. She doesn't react to every trigger. She pauses, breathes, and chooses her response. She walks through the world with emotional sovereignty. In her presence, people begin to soften. Not because she demands it, but because her energy invites truth. She does not need to raise her voice. Her stillness says enough. She doesn't need to be understood by everyone. She needs only to be faithful to what she knows. And what she knows is that her sensitivity is not a defect. It is her compass, her shield, her guide, her connection to the divine. From this place, she doesn't need to see the entire path ahead. She trusts that each step will reveal itself. Not because she is certain, but because she is aligned. And that alignment leads her deeper, into more clarity, more peace, more sacred love. Not the kind that demands she change to be loved, but the kind that celebrates her for who she has become. Because now she no longer ignores what she senses. She listens, and from that listening, she lives. When a profound shift begins to unfold in a woman's life, it rarely comes with fireworks or applause. Instead, it arrives quietly, almost imperceptibly, through a longing for silence, a shedding of what no longer serves, a sudden tiredness that signals inner change, and a deepening awareness that cannot be ignored. These signs are not random. They are sacred invitations. Each one is a doorway guiding her back to herself. It is in the silence that she hears her truth. In the detachment, she discovers her strength. In the fatigue, she uncovers the need for rest and recalibration. Through solitude, she meets her truest self, not as someone broken or lacking, but as someone being reshaped. And in her growing sensitivity, she learns not just to hear, but to feel, to discern, to trust. This journey does not require perfection. It requires presence. It asks her to walk with awareness, to release what dims her light, to protect her peace, and to choose relationships that mirror her healing, not her past pain. She doesn't need to beg, to chase, or to prove. She simply becomes. And in that becoming, life begins to mirror the strength, clarity, and authenticity she's cultivated within. This is not the end of her transformation. It is only the beginning of her becoming.